Welcome, everybody, to episode 116 of Axioms on Trial. And today we're going to be talking with Brian, who is a Christian. And thanks for coming on.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you having me.
Let's get right into it. Why don't you give the audience a little bit about yourself and what you believe and why, and what your background is?
Yeah, I'm a native Texan. Actually just moved over here to California, so doing the opposite move from most people. I am at seminary, at the Master's Seminary, and been working for a nonprofit the last 3 years that does work in Haiti in India. And now I actually work for the Master's University and Development Department. So enjoy what I do. Obviously, I'm a Christian through and through. And, when it comes to a worldview, the first thing I would hope everybody recognizes that worldview is not just relegated, or at least understanding what a worldview is should not just be relegated to an academic discussion for some people, up in the higher echelons of the academia. Every person, whether they're blue collar, white collar, or anybody in the middle, should have a worldview and understand where their worldview comes from, and to be able to explain and defend their worldview. And I think the 5 main aspects of a worldview that make up a worldview that must be answered is the origin of life, meaning of life, purpose of life, morality, some type of moral system, and the destiny of life. So that pretty much wraps up a worldview in a nutshell, and not only be able to answer those questions individually, but have coherence and consistency between those 5 areas. And it's my postulation that the Christian worldview can answer those questions most succinctly and sufficiently and coherently, in concordance with truth and reason. So that's kind of that's me in a nutshell.
Okay. So let's start with a point of agreement. Is yes, I think that these are all important questions that we should try to strive for an answer to.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not that answer can be found is a different question, but that at least it is worthwhile to ask the question. I can agree with you on, obviously, being an agnostic atheist, being somebody who is motivated by wanting to understand what is true. My journey has brought me to a different conclusion than yours. I don't find theism anywhere on the spectrum to answer those questions in a satisfactory way. Sometimes not even in a coherent way. But maybe you can tell me why it is that you feel that Christianity has succeeded in answering those questions and what those answers are. And I think the most important thing to me, and why I'm an atheist currently, is that I have never seen a religious person be able to provide something that can show me why their beliefs aren't purely imaginary. That why couldn't I explain away religious belief simply through looking at psychology? So if you can ground these beliefs in something concrete, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, exactly. We're wanting to ground things in something that's concrete, but I'm interested in, and we were talking about this before the show, where does the concrete come from? No pun intended. I don't prescribe to the form of Christianity, and I think you'd agree with me here, where just because we don't know something, we just chalk it up to faith, or there's a hole in my worldview, so I'm just going to plaster it in with faith and la-di-da that fixes my worldview. I don't appreciate when that happens. I think we can give more sophisticated answers. I think if we're all humble enough, we would recognize there are holes in our worldview, one, and two, things that we just don't understand to to in a sufficient way. Um, and I would say the most fundamental question that we should ask is what satisfies the necessary conditions for intelligibility in the first sense. Me and you both agree that we want to be able to come up with the most rational, reasonable answers to um, our worldview and to be living in accordance with truth. But I think the question that is one step before that is asking what are the necessary conditions for intelligibility? What's the pre-science to science? How do we justify the nature of truth? If we all want to live truthfully, um, what is our justification for truth, for us being able to even rely on truth, if that makes sense? And I
Sure.
think the Christian worldview provides a pretty slam dunk transcendental argument for the those that meets those necessary preconditions, specifically in the realm of the immaterial. I think from a materialistic worldview, it's hard to justify the three things. It's in a materialistic worldview, it's hard to justify the nature of the immaterial, so laws of logic, reason, truth in and of itself, from which we produce a scientific method. Secondly, I think it's hard to produce a stance of uh, objective truth, or objectivity in anything, as well as third would be it's hard to produce a measure of objective morality. And I think those three things are most consistent in throughout the world, and Christianity sufficiently answers all three of those categories. And I don't
So
exactly know where. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, well, let's take a step backward just for a moment, because you said you provided what the questions are that are worthwhile to ask, um, and I'm wondering what it is that your view, how it's answered those questions. What is the answer to those questions as far as the meaning and the purpose and all those things? And then we can get back on this particular issue what you just said, because I definitely have some questions as to what you just said.
Yeah, sure. I think, again, holding to more of a presuppositionalist view, the most fundamental question is what is our justification for truth itself? And uh, that question, I think, needs to be answered. Me and you were talking about this the other day. That it's the nature of the immaterial that's hard to answer, and from which that's once we're able to justify that answer, then we're able to build a worldview and be able to get into say comparisons of worldview for against let's just say Hindus or Muslims or Christianity. We can compare those with theology and the historicity or empiricism, but really at the foundational level of the presuppositionalist view is justification for the nature of the immaterial. And that's where I think is the strongest argument for Christianity and the weakest argument for materialism. Because
Okay,
I mean, do you prescribe to objective truth, or is there? I don't. I would curious to get
sure.
your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so and I'll explain sort of what my feelings are about what you're saying, and then I'm really curious to hear what your argument is as to why Christianity succeeds in doing what you're doing. But from my perspective, there is no problem at all from a materialist perspective, to talk about objective truth, to talk about morality. Um, in fact, I think what we see in the world is far better explained in a far more concrete manner, uh, from my worldview than yours. And I think on the one thing that I can agree with you on is on this issue of the immaterial,
Okay.
because it seems to me that you are already assuming and presupposing within your worldview that the immaterial is an actual real category, whereas um, now you can be, by the way, you can be an atheist and still hold to some immaterial
Yeah,
reality.
yeah. J
But,
Mike does, and I would be interested to get his point on that. But
um, But
You
I don't.
don't you
I
don't
don't.
think there's the immaterial?
No, in fact, I think that it is pretty incoherent and linguistically vacuous to propose such a thing. I think it is an error in language to suggest that such a thing exists. And so when you ask about the laws of logic, um, and well, I do want to actually, Jim, like I said something in the audience that is kind of along what I'm saying. It seems that when you talk about the preconditions for truth, you have to establish a criteria that will presuppose the thing you are attempting to do. For example, you have to age a criteria to know if God revealed you something or not, which will be a truth about the criteria that doesn't depend on God, and thus defeat the idea of grounding all truth in God. What I would add on that um, is that from my worldview, um, how would I say this?
Well, let me clarify. Do you have so you don't believe objective truth or objective morality?
No, I believe it. So when I say objective truth, all I mean is the state of affairs, right? So
State of
things are
affairs.
the way they are because they couldn't be otherwise. Like it's incoherent to say that there isn't a state of affairs. So ontology is what it is. The nature of things are what they are, regardless of our perception or understanding of it. Then there is the question of, can we understand this truth? Um, how are we limited in understanding this truth? And that is an epistemic question. And I'm far more skeptical about that project. But that's not a rejection of objective truth. That's a skepticism about our capacity to understand this objective truth. And I think the truth that we do understand is going to be limited and contextualized in a number of different things. Um, I think actually the question of objective morality is far simpler for my worldview, because I
Okay.
think all we're doing when we're talking about objective morality is looking at aspects of the nature of consciousness. So what I mean when I say good and evil is, what are the actions that will lead uh, conscious beings to either suffer or experience well-being? And we use words like good and bad to discern the difference between states of well-being and states of suffering. So the same way that you may be concerned with being with God in heaven as opposed to being, you know, in hell for eternity, you also care about well-being and suffering. You think that there's something inherently good about the experience of being with God as opposed to being away from God. Um, I have the same notion of well-being and suffering, but I'm making less assumptions. I'm not extending these notions to some immaterial realm. I'm looking at what we can actually observe, which is the nature of our psychology.
So is truth object? Let me put this in simple categories here. Is truth uh, internal to us, or is it external to us?
Yeah, so I think that there is, so the state of affairs is a state of affairs regardless of our perception, right? But the question is, so it would be in some sense external. It would just be, things are what they are, right? But that state, that reality may then be processed through our senses in such a way where we may catch a glimpse of the truth, maybe more than that. But certainly, we don't have access to um, certainty of that truth. The only thing I can be certain of is that I exist because I'm having an experience, and
Mm-hmm.
that entails that I exist. But the details of my nature, the details of the nature of my reality are uncertain. And so that's not to say that there isn't a truth to the question. Like the question has an answer, but whether or not we're in a position to derive an answer and be certain of that answer is the question. And I don't think that your worldview is capable of bridging that gap any more than mine, because you are using, to some degree, similar tools plus tools that I think work less successfully, such as things like faith. And yeah, so sort of immaterial, timeless, spaceless, these are all characteristics of absolutely nothing. This is what Zachariah is saying. I would say that from my worldview, we understand existence through a context of space and time. So when I hear theists talk about God, oh, did his computer die? I'm not sure what just happened. I hope it was. Can you guys still hear me? He might have. Yeah, I think he has a bad connection. I got worried that it was on my end for a second. Yeah, right. Exactly, Jim. Like, state of affairs are truth makers. Propositions are true or false. State of affairs are the truth makers. Okay, so hopefully he'll can come back on in a minute, and we can continue this conversation. Yeah, but either way, so I'll address kind of continue with what I was saying. Well, there we go. It says they need to connect the webcam. Hey there.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you better now. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, dude. My phone overheated.
Oh, no worries. No worries. Is it going to be okay now? Like, is it fine?
We'll see, dude. Oh,
Okay, no worries.
crazy. Yeah, if I cut out again, I'm just in my car parked and my phone is overheating, but it's all good. We can continue. Sorry about that.
Sure. No, you're good. So yeah, what I was saying was, and that and this was echoed by Mike here in the comments. That where was it?
So we were
The
saying
state
that
of
truth is either internal or external to us, and I think to include morality, that it's either one subject to us as individuals or it's universal, meaning it's external to us. And I think if we admit that morality is external to us, the most sufficient answer to objective morality would be to posit a moral law giver.
yeah,
In
right, right.
let me finish this. Just in opposition to, I know there's other arguments out there like moral naturalism or Cornell realism or Jackson realism, because I think the problem with those is that you're trying to boil down in a materialistic worldview. Moral facts cannot be reduced down to natural or physical facts. And if they can, because natural and physical facts are subject to change, that means the morality is also subject to change. Or if morality is just emergent properties from these physical facts or natural phenomena or natural facts, then that also produces a problem, because just like the former scenario, they are subject to change. And if if the moral or natural facts are subject to change, then the emergent properties are subject to change as well, meaning there would be no objective morality or objective truth if the fundamental principles are changing.
So
Does that make sense?
yeah, so a number of things here. First is, and this is what I was going to say too. Propositions are true or false. A state of affairs are the truth makers. So the question has some nuance. So my view rejects what you just stated, which is that I don't think there's anything about viewing morality from a materialist perspective that suggests that anything is subject to change. So I don't think that the way to answer the moral question is going to be independent of the nature of experience. So in that sense, that question is going to be an internal one. That's not to say that all questions of truth are internal ones, but that question specifically is addressing the nature of our experience, not anything external to our experience. What I would say is that consciousness has a nature that is necessary. There is nothing about um, and the reason why I think this is because we see it. My argument is that there are shared universals across phenomenology. And so there are certain things that are going to lead conscious beings to suffer, certain things that are going to lead it to experience states of well being. And I don't see any reason to assume that this is going to be subject to change. Even if it was subject to change, how this will be a defeater. The same way that, even in the Christian tradition,
then how could
there,
you make an ought out of your worldview? Like, if there's just is, how are you able to establish what we ought to do in your morality?
sure, because oughts, from my worldview and the way that I understand language, oughts are always concerned with goals, right? And so when we say we ought to do something, what we're really saying is that there is a goal that we are trying to reach. And when we're talking
But
about
who
more,
says the goal? That's my problem. Is that
sure,
why
yeah,
would there be a goal? Because all of your stating is an is. This is what is. How
yes,
would you ever not only get an ought but a goal from?
right. So in two ways. One, what I'm expressing is I am rejecting this idea that there is this distinction between oughts and goals. I'm actually saying that oughts are a certain kind of is, and the way that the goal arises is from looking at what it is that the nature of our consciousness is. So, for example,
Well, let me ask one quick question.
sure.
I don't think I think you're conflating those two things, a goal and an ought. Because what's assumed in your goal is that we ought to follow the goal or ought to have this at our goal. And so I
Well, that's
still
what I was
don't
trying to
think you're
get
getting
to.
around. Okay.
What so that's what I'm getting to is that I am suggesting that the goal isn't arbitrary, that the goal arises from facts about our consciousness. So it's not that we could have, so it is inherent within the experience of well being, in contrast with the experience of suffering, that we existentially necessarily are going to be driven towards one versus the other. So, what we mean by moral oughts is just what behaviors can we implement that will lead us um, to one end versus the other. The same way that again, this problem of us and its is a problem that you have in your worldview as well, because um, following, God's plan or God's nature or God's commandments, those are still is statements that you are attempting to derive an ought from. Like I can say, why should I ought to care about God's commandments? Why should I ought to care about God's nature? You find yourself in the same problem from my perspective.
Yeah. Well, one, in the Christian worldview, very simply answers why there would be an ought. But I mean, what do you do with, like, when people have different goals or oughts than you? I mean, some people want to see the world burn. Some people want to, commit suicide. Some
Sure.
people think killing is better than sustaining life. I mean, there just
Yeah.
seems too many contradictory
No. So
oughts in it.
so so this is not a problem for me at all, because this is, again, I'm not grounding my morality, or not my morality, but morality, in mere opinion or mere arbitrary stances. I'm grounding it in facts we can learn about um, consciousness. So people can think that um, they would be better off doing certain things simply out of ignorance of not knowing what the experience is like of doing the opposite. So let me try to verbalize it this way. Um, if if I believe that eating McDonald's every single day of my life is going to make me healthier, right? I can believe that, but it doesn't make it true. Objectively, there are going to be facts about health that are going to be independent of what my psychological
Yeah,
attitude about it is.
I recognize that. I
Right.
agree.
Now, if I say,
Okay, go ahead.
so if I say, well, okay, but I don't care about health, I'm going to value eating badly until, I die of heart disease. Like, I can do that, but I can't call myself healthy in the process. Like, I can have a different goal, but I can't call my goal a goal of health. At that point, my value is going to be not one of health, but one of gluttony, I guess. Right?
But again, why is your fundamental goal health? We can understand from what I'm trying to adopt your worldview here. Understand from our consciousness and our scientific inquiry that McDonald's is bad for us and it's bad for our health. But yet the fundamental question is still unanswered. Why is health or pursuing good health even what we ought to do?
Because of the content of the experience. Because the content of, so language.
What does that? I don't even know what that means.
So
What do you
I'll
mean
try
by that?
to. So the same way that in your worldview, the content of the experience of being with God is inherently preferable to the content of the experience of being away from God, phenomenologically speaking. Like, language is secondary to phenomena. I'm saying that there is an inherent nature to our experience, and certain experiences are inherently preferable to others. And we use these words to describe the difference.
Why are they preferable?
As a state of affairs, as a brute fact, the same way that why would being with God be preferable to being without God? Because in your worldview, there is something inherent to that experience that is objectively better than being away from God by the nature of the experience itself, that being the primary thing. Like, you recognize that from your worldview, that God's nature is the epitome of goodness, that being with God is inherently, objectively preferable to being in hell for all of eternity. You have the same concern about well-being and suffering.
I'm not talking about preference of what feels good. I'm talking about the fundamental justification for morality and truth. We keep jumping back and forth with truth and morality. Maybe we can just stick with truth here for a second. Sure. Truth, I would say, is not simply the state of reality and affairs. Truth relates to the state of a proposition in its correspondence with reality. So these propositions or truth claims are universal, they're abstract, they're unchanging. And again, I don't, how would you justify the nature of these immaterial objects in a materialistic worldview?
Yeah, so the first thing I would do from my perspective is I reject this idea of the material to begin with. I think that the concept of the material emerges from a misunderstanding of the way in which language is being used. So that's the first thing I would say, is that the material isn't actually a thing. So from a materialist worldview, it's not that logic informs relational behaviors. Is that relational behaviors inform logic, which then in turn informs us.
Say that again. I just want to make sure I get your thoughts correct.
So I'll try to phrase it this way. It sounds like when you talk about logic as being this sort of transcendent, immaterial, these transcendent immaterial laws, it sounds like you're saying that the logic is informing rational behaviors, that our understanding is stemming from the laws of logic. Where, from my view, I say that it is relational behaviors that inform logic, which in turn informs us. That
relational behaviors. What do you mean by relational behaviors?
Yeah, so reality is the way that it is. Like we in our experience of reality, we observe um, we observe nature as operating in a certain kind of way. We observe certain kind of patterns. Our minds are structured in such a way that we make sense of our experience in a certain
Yeah,
way.
yeah. We use our reasoning skills to be able to um, make hypotheses and conduct the law of induction and
So
do a
what I
number of
would
different things. I get
yeah,
that.
and what I would say is that intelligibility is just a feature of our reality.
But okay, so let me see if we agree here. Are you saying that the laws of logic and our reasoning skills or the immaterial is or is not subject to change?
Well, I'm saying the immaterial doesn't exist in my worldview.
The immaterial does not exist.
No,
How does the immaterial? So how would you? I mean, the laws of logic would be a perfect example of something that's immaterial.
I disagree there. The way that I view the laws of logic, I view them as descriptions of what we observe in the physical world. So
Is a
language.
description immaterial or material? It's not like I have a bubble or a cloud above my head every time I have a thought and it's a material thought. It's
Um,
an immaterial thought describing the process or the manifestation of something external, but the thought itself is immaterial.
so I disagree with that as well. It may be, it's true that the idea of an apple is not going to be the object apple, but the idea is simply another type of physical phenomena. It's not. I mean, by material, I don't just mean like here's a bottle, here's an apple, here's a table. It's it is still like forces in physics are still are not immaterial, but they're not objects like chairs. And I view thoughts the same way. It's brains doing what brains do, and when I express the sound apple, every part of that phenomena is physical. The sound coming out of my mouth, the idea that leads to the sound coming out of my mouth. All these things have a physical reality to them. Um,
Yeah, I see. That's where I would disagree. I think you're kind of lumping everything into one uh, bucket there, and I'm making a distinction between uh, my voice as it's coming out of my mouth, the wavelengths as it's bouncing off, walls and everything else, and we can record that and all. But the thought process of choosing which words to say, that my consciousness, my reasoning skills, or how I'm developing sentences, obviously my brain is involved, but I'm not talking about the mechanism of what produces, like, as an emergent property of the immaterial. I'm talking about the immaterial of my conscience.
well, yeah,
It's not material. i'm
but
not
that is
i'm not
primarily what I'm rejecting. I'm saying that consciousness and everything you just described is not immaterial. It is precisely material because I think that the material is all that there is, and that then um, we are arbitrarily and I think mistakenly have come to believe that there is this distinction between the mental and the physical, when in reality the mental is just another feature of the physical. Um,
Well, that's I think that's where me and you are probably missing the mark there. I would just say that there's a pretty easy argument for the nature of immaterial. I think it's just using common sense. You can say there's things that are immaterial, and if not, I mean, how would the laws of logic be universal or
because they're
timeless?
descriptions of a universal physical reality. Because that again, that's not. I don't consider that to be a successful argument. Because
Okay, so you're saying the laws of logic are external to us?
I'm saying the laws of logic are description of what it is that we see in our reality.
So we are using laws of logic to discover laws of logic.
No, we're describing what we
Like
see,
how
and
how do we come to that in the first place? Like if we were to go way back, we were millions and billions of years ago, we were just little fish floating around in the Atlantic Sea, and we didn't have maybe we didn't have consciousness, or who knows. And what did we have? One fourth the ability to reason, and then we produced a one half ability to reason, and then we develop somehow the ability to reason that we can reason. That would be like me saying the Bible's true because the Bible says it's true. I mean, you just laughed me out of this TikTok, but
no, I don't think
or this
I'm saying that at
podcast, but
all.
I'm just saying, by what mechanism way back long ago did you discover reason?
No, so I'm not saying that the laws of logic are true because the laws of logic are true. In fact, I'm using the laws of logic as being descriptive of what it is our experience is. That doesn't mean that there may not be some external reality that we can't comprehend because our tools are limited.
Yeah,
If I
if
let
they're
me give an
from the
example, right?
universe, though, but if they're
It,
sorry to cut you off, if they're from the universe, if they're bound to the physical phenomena that we see in this world, um, they would be subject to change, given the easy statement that or conclusion that the universe at one point didn't exist, or the
no,
material realm didn't exist.
I don't see any reason to accept that claim. We have there's no current consensus about whether or not the universe had an origin. All we know so far, as far as back as we can go, is this point of expansion. But from my perspective, the concept of nothingness is incoherent. So I wouldn't say that any of what I'm describing is leading to the conclusion that things could be subject to change. They could be. There, the tools we use may be imperfect.
So you're saying the laws of logic could be subject to change?
I don't. What I'm saying is that I don't even know what that would mean, and I don't think it is possible for us to comprehend what that would even look like. Now, there are other forms of logic, right? Classical logic isn't the only form of logic that there is. There are non-classical approaches to logic, but they are not things that I comprehend or think have much connection to our experience and to the world. But again, the argument here is on what grounds do you say that intelligibility couldn't be a necessary feature of our reality, as opposed to saying, no, it has to come from God? Like, what is the inference and what is the argument that you're providing to establish that that is the truth? Because remember, I could have no argument, right? I could have no explanation from a material perspective. I mean, I think I do, right? But I could have no explanation from a materialist perspective or from an atheist
Mm-hmm.
perspective, and your worldview be just as unlikely or just as incoherent. So well, I'm curious to know how it is that you are claiming that God grounds logic and everything else.
Well, I would say, as we look at the nature of the immaterial, that you can break it into four categories or four descriptions of it: that it's unchanging, universal, uh, timeless, and irrevocable to the mind, meaning it's bound inextricably to the mind or to a mind. And if I was looking at those four descriptions as the fundamental properties of the immaterial, it would make the most sense, even using an inductive argument, to find those same four properties in the source of the immaterial, which would make much more logical sense in a timeless, universal, unchanging mind than it would into this stab in the dark at, like, oh, it could be emergent properties from the universe, but we don't know. The Big Bang could have been a part of it. Who knows? It was before the Big Bang. It's
But you
bound to the universe. It's not bound to the universe. It just seems very, in a nutshell, way more likely, at least more likely than not, or more probable than not, as a suitable solution to the nature of the material, which is the foundation for then producing, like what we're talking about earlier, empiricism, scientific theory, all of that.
But you say logical and likely, but again, I don't see any establishing from your perspective to any of those things. Like, you can't attribute likelihood or probability to something that you haven't grounded as being more than mere psychology. You say you talk about the immaterial as though it is obviously a thing, and you would use the word common sense. But from my perspective, that it's precisely what is not being applied, because the only common sense, from my perspective, would be, well, what is that we actually have an experience of? We have an experience of the physical world. Then we have a description of the physical world, which is still through physical processes. I don't view the immaterial as common sense. I don't view claiming.
So where do I go? Where do I go to get laws of logic? That's, like the old joke. Do I go to Home Depot and buy a pack of laws of logic? Where can I go and touch laws of logic?
But that is precisely, I think, the strawmanning of physicalism that is not addressing what the physicalist is actually expressing. Because, as I said a few minutes ago, I'm not claiming by physicalism that the laws of logic are bottles I can pick up and buy, right? Forces like gravity, electromagnetic fields, like, these are still physical phenomena within physics.
I recognize that,
but they're not bottles. They're not
those
objects.
Are physical phenomenon, and there's non-physical phenomenon.
I don't agree with that. That's precisely the point of disagreement, right?
Yeah, but you're providing no evidence or justification for how laws of logic would be physical.
No, sure. I'm saying that the laws of logic are learned descriptions of the physical world. There's not this separation.
They are descriptions. They are not the physical world. They are learned descriptions, meaning that's immaterial.
No. Meaning, no, because like I was saying earlier, the description is just sounds coming out of my mouth, is my awareness, which again, I would say is just a feature of brains doing what brains do. It's obviously the sound, the symbol apple is, the symbol itself is dead, right? But the symbol is describing something physical, and the expression of the symbol is just another physical phenomena. It's vocal cords doing what vocal cords do, and me having an experience, which again, I would say the consciousness is grounded in the brain. But now I want to clear something up here, because I don't think that just because something makes more sense to you, like, that to me isn't really an argument. You're saying that I'm not grounding.
Should I follow something that doesn't make more sense?
Well, what I want to ask is, let's pretend that
Well, do you recognize the silliness of that statement you just said? Following every person should follow the rational or have a justification for their belief, right? I mean, we're not just aimlessly wandering through this world, taking stabs at things and saying, "Oh, it just feels right."
Sure.
Right. So, that's what I was saying before, is that it's the logical application of those characteristics of truth. But sorry, I cut you off. You were saying
no, you're fine. What I'm, again, the problem that remains for me is that I think that my description of what logic is far more logical and common sense. I'm saying we apply language as a tool to describe our physical world, and our reality has certain patterns that emerge that we observe from our experience, and that this is what we apply when we say that we're using language and the tools of logic and mathematics. None of that, I think, requires the assumption of anything non-physical. But like J. Mike was telling you when you guys talked, you can take a dualistic perspective, believe in abstract objects, believe in the non-physical, and be an atheist. My question is,
yes,
how do you ground?
You're
right. But I'm saying, but this is the question, right? I'm curious to understand how you're grounding your presuppositions that it has to come from God, it has to come from a mind, how you know that a mind can be independent of the brain. And also, the last question I want to ask you there is, how do you explain the mind body problem? How does an immaterial substance or immaterial mind interact with the physical world?
Well, in the same way, my immaterial mind interacts with the physical world. I think, therefore I am. And again, I've already given my argument to those four inductive descriptions of, or that inductive argument with those four descriptions of the nature of the immaterial, which would make most sense to find those same four characteristics in in God and the timeless, universal, changing mind. And I think that satisfies the preconditions of intelligibility, again, from which we build our worldview from. And it also gives, because of the aseity of God and his moral character, he is the standard by which we derive morality. Morality is either internal to us or objective to us. And if you, as soon as you make the jump, in my belief, from the internal to the external definition of objective morality, I think it's a lost battle in the moral naturalist, because everything from that point on has to be grounded in some type of or is reduced to some type of moral or natural fact, or it's an emergent property of a natural fact, and all of that is subject to change. So it's a vicious circle when you try to ground your objective reality in something natural or moral, which is
But
exactly what I believe your morality is doing.
all, and again, I don't mean for this to sound uh, uh, dismissive or disrespectful or aggressive. I just don't know how to phrase it in any other way. Um, all all I'm hearing from where I'm standing are claims, not arguments. Because for me, you know, in a number of, I'm trying to think of how to.
Deal with my claims. I just gave
Yeah,
you.
I'm trying to think of where to start, because you said you said that if it's grounded in minds, it's subject to change, except when it's grounded in God's mind, then somehow God's mind doesn't change.
Yeah,
But
because
you're
he's
assuming,
immaterial, timeless, unchanging mind. That he is not bound by the confines of the physical world, nor is he, and he's not bound by time, any of those things. Just in the same manner, in the same way, in the same application, that laws of logic are not bound by time, space, change, but they are bound to a mind. Same
yeah,
exact property.
I think your perspective is self-defeating, because you're talking about existence, the concept of existence, and then stripping away everything that linguistically makes sense to us when we use the term existence, which is something within space and time. I don't know any like, so for example, with this idea of, if our mind exists within the physical world, then that makes it automatically subject to change. How how that follows, I don't understand, because I can simply posit that there is a nature to the physical world which is itself unchanging. Some things in the physical world may change, but other things may be necessary, and don't change. And so I don't see any problem there, for any contradiction there from a physicalist perspective, to propose an unchanging nature. I don't see where the contradiction lies.
I think the contradiction stems from or arises from the fact that all physical, uh, anything physical is subject to change, to include the expansion of the universe, or even before. I mean, I guess you'd have to have a pretty compelling argument even for the origins of the universe and its eternality if you want to argue that the laws of logic are somehow material and they're universal, so that they're bound to, if they are bound to the material, then material has to be eternal.
But I feel like you're sort of expressing the same premise. Like, my question was, on what grounds do you claim that no aspect of the physical world is unchanging?
Laws of logic are unchanging.
Right. So I could just say, yeah, but I'm not sure how that's related, because I could just say, well, yeah, that's an example of an expression of the physical world that is unchanging. That's I feel like a point on my side. I don't see, from a physicalist perspective, I don't see any problem with positing an aspect of reality that is unchanging. You're saying that that's contradictory. I'm asking where the contradiction lies. And your response was to, I think, just repeat the premise, right? And when you say outside of space and time, I don't know what that means. And also, yeah, I do actually want to bring this up. Alex says, who cares if things are changing? Why? Who's to say that even math, logic are unchanging? They're just a claim and a hope. Um, why, even if we were to think
I
that
mean,
everything changed,
that's
why there would be an
such a
issue?
silly question. Who cares if things are unchanging? That is literally the justification in the thing, in the source that gives me and Cease and everybody else on that's living on this planet certainty that when we wake up tomorrow, A is not going to equal not A. I mean, that's the most fundamental question that gives us certainty from which we build the scientific method. We're able to send a man on the moon it's just such a silly question. That
I don't think
I
it
mean, the
brings
fact
us.
that
Sorry, go ahead.
why would we not try to justify the nature of something that's unchanging? I mean, without that, I mean, your worldview is based on insanity and
No,
irrationality that you
I don't.
can't even get up today and even be able to conduct yourself in any type
No.
of logical,
So no.
reasonable way.
So here's why I reject that statement, because I don't think that the us observing patterns, right, gives us this is the problem of induction, right? Does not give us a certainty that the pattern is going to continue tomorrow. I have good reasons based on prior experience to believe that the pattern will continue, and maybe the pattern is itself inherent to our reality, but I cannot be certain of it. But
Yeah,
that's not a
that's where
problem.
I would say the Christian can stand firm to say that the laws of logic tomorrow are not subject to change. Where the materialistic worldview, again, I go back to my other claim, the worldview is founded on irrationality because inherent in that is a lack of certainty because nature changes. And you can't say without a shadow of a doubt the laws of logic are not going to change tomorrow where we can. That's the biggest difference is
But here's
you're
the key.
operating in blind faith. I'm operating in truth and reason and logic.
I,
That's how I see that.
yeah, I see it entirely differently. I don't think I'm applying any level of faith.
Well, you just said your whole worldview is based on. I mean, I can get up tomorrow and laws of logic cannot change. That's blind faith. I would hate to have a
Wait,
worldview founded upon blind faith.
what am I having blind faith in?
The fact that you can't say for certain that the laws of logic are going to be the laws of logic tomorrow.
Yeah, right. How is that blind faith, though? I'm acknowledging an epistemic limitation. It is not a belief. I don't have a belief in something unseen. I have an expectation based on prior experience that I recognize I have no certainty of. But I think that when you
Yeah,
say the
there's no
Christian,
certainty. I mean, you
right?
just
But
said it. There's no certainty.
I have no problem with that. In fact, I started off saying that the only thing I'm certain of is that I exist. Now, you can express certainty. You can say that Christianity provides a certainty, but from my worldview, it doesn't. What you're
So
expressing there is your psychological state of certainty, not justification that you actually have certainty. Because I don't
So I
think this
think
Christianity is actually doing what you're
this
doing,
is
what
where I
you're
think
saying
the
here.
conversation is kind of going in circles because
Sure.
earlier you were making the argument that there is objective truth, which I would
Yes.
classify as something as objective or certain. That that objective truth is not subject to change. That I can be certain. Like if you were consistent in what you said earlier, you would say that you can be certain that 1 + 1 is going to equal 2 tomorrow.
No, so there's two issues here, which, and I didn't clarify earlier well enough. I'm making a distinction between the state of affairs as being object. So there's truth as in the proposition, right? Like, yeah, I can say a proposition, and that proposition is either true or false, right? But what is the case is the state of affairs. The ontology of my reality is what's objective. My perception of that my expression of that, what I think is the case, may be true or false, and that could be wrong. Now, I can't be wrong about me having an experience, which is why I say that is the only thing I'm certain of. But everything else, I'm not
I
certain
am
of.
well aware that because of our lack of education and knowledge on certain topics, whether it's chemistry or physics or history, we are not going to be able to give the correct answer or a truthful answer. But the underlining premise is that there is truth and there is
Yes,
false. Like it's either
yeah, sure.
a Abraham Lincoln did exist. That is always going to be true. So that is a certain. I can have certainty that Abraham Lincoln always exists. But by your logic, you
No.
just said I can wake up tomorrow, and because the laws of logic don't apply, or false is not true, and true is whatever it would be, that Abraham Lincoln uh, didn't exist because the laws of logic at the very epistemic level or ontological level, like you were saying, collapsed.
No, so I think there's some
And
misunderstanding here. Well, one thing I do want to read is Begin to Know writes, one of the recent lessons from the field of quantum information is that information processing and computation generally, which Brian would place as immaterial, has a direct physical correlate, which is kind of what I was trying to say earlier. But no, I'm
yeah,
not.
again, that there's a difference between something that correlates to something and the thing itself. So there's again a consistent conflation of the process of the laws of logic and the application of laws of logic.
Yeah, but the thing here is that the laws of logic in this context, or the information, is not being viewed as having some immaterial reality. I'm not. I think you're misunderstanding me, because I think
Okay.
you're
Well,
thinking that
and let me
I'm.
clarify: blind faith is without warrant. I'm not saying that you don't know what anything, or
Sure.
you're just completely walking in the dark here. I'm saying blind faith, in my definition, is having a worldview that is without justification and without warrant. And
Which is what
from
I
that,
think the Christian has, from my
yeah,
perspective.
but I just told you in my worldview, I can account for certainty. You just admitted that you cannot account for certainty.
I don't. But here's the thing: you, I think you believe you're accounting for certainty. I don't believe you're accounting for certainty. That's the problem. I
Are
think
you
that
certain
you
about that? Are you certain that I'm not certain?
are you certain that I'm not certain? What do you
Yeah,
mean?
meaning who cares if there's no certainty? What is the purpose of this conversation?
Why
The
would
the the fact that we're having this conversation means that me and you both intrinsically believe. Everybody listening to this conversation both believe. Everybody believes that there is truth that is certain, that is not going to change.
most epistemic
That's
theories?
why we get on these TikToks and discuss these things. Is
Yeah,
because we
sure,
do.
but yeah, but most epistemic theories of knowledge don't require certainty
I get
for
that.
knowledge.
Now, like
Yeah.
physics, you look at subatomic levels and Higgs bosons and bosons. There's a lot of uncertainty there. Okay, I'm not conflating that with objective truth. I recognize hypothesis and the scientific method. There's a tons of uncertainty out there in the world that is completely different than the fact that there is truth and A equals, doesn't equal not A,
Yeah. So
or
so
one
again,
plus one equals
I'm not
two.
disagreeing with you that A can equal non-A. What I'm saying is there is nothing about that fact that requires God as a foundation. I can say that A equals A as a fact of reality, which me having consciousness is capable of comprehending. That intelligibility is a feature of consciousness. So when you say that you have certainty, um, I don't see you as having justified that. What I see is you haven't come up with a narrative, a story that tries to make those claims, but doesn't justify those claims beyond the premise. So if you want to ask me, am I certain of what I said? Um, Only within the context of me applying the tools that we both agree on in the first
Yeah,
place. But
so
I
you could be
but
wrong.
I sure.
But I'm just saying that the narrative and the story would be anybody with a rational mind would say that 1 plus 1 is never going to equal 3.
Sure.
and that
why would
you
that?
can take to the bank.
Yeah, that's awesome. I agree with you. But why would our recognition that 1 + 1 = 2 be dependent on God existing, as opposed to being
That's the
dependent
only
on?
option, because
No, it
anything
isn't.
else is the again, the transcendental argument that I'm arguing something to be true because of the impossibility of the contrary. Meaning, if the
Yeah, but
only one
that's
standing in the ring is Christianity or a God, then that has to be the answer. Whereas if anything else doesn't produce certainty, you just said that your worldview can't produce certainty, and we can't be certain about 1 + 1 = 2. Well, then the only person standing is God.
so you saying the impossibility of the contrary is actually just restating the same premise that you haven't actually justified, because I can posit that.
I gave the 4 properties that I use the law of induction for.
Yeah, but
I applied that to the mind of God. I argued that I think you're kind of giving a little bit of a cop out or a weak answer in terms of the immaterial and the material conflation. I think the majority of people would disagree with you. In fact, I know J. Mike disagrees with you that there is immaterial. There is a difference between immaterial and material. I think the stance that you're taking is actually way left field in terms of trying to morph these two things. I think you're being consistent, to be honest, in the materialistic worldview. I just don't think it coheres with reality.
so let me respond to that this way. Well, as far as J. Mike, J. Mike is actually agnostic on the matter. He just takes different positions in the moment just to like follow through the arguments. But he's not.
I mean,
So let me
that's
just
my
say,
frustration with most skeptics. Like, who cares like how many different positions you can take? All I care about is the truth.
sure.
Like, I applaud.
What I no no I that's I think it's, I mean, I think it's good
No,
to.
I think J. Mike has taken a stance about um,
No, I mean,
there
I
being
talk to him
material.
regularly. I don't think
Oh,
he
okay.
has a clear stance. But what I'm saying is that the only I mean, you're saying that my view is kind of divorced from reality. I think my view is the only thing that actually looks at what we're capable of saying, reasonably speaking. I don't think that you have provided, again, all these things about, well, for there to be objective truth, it has to be unchanging. Don't know why that has to be the case, but even if it was, I can believe that to be a feature of physical reality. There is some aspect of reality in the physical realm, because I think that's all there is. It doesn't change. You saying that's impossible, I don't know what you're basing that on. And actually, here I want to show you this comment. Can God both exist and not exist? Oh, are you still there? Can you still hear me? Brian, I don't think I can hear you anymore. Are you
Yeah,
still there?
can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Sorry, man.
Um, no, you're
My
good.
reception's not bad, or not.
I want
It's
I want to ask you this question. Can God both exist and not exist?
hold on. Let me just walk back till I get better service. All right, man. Go ahead.
Can God both exist and not exist? And what grounds can you say that God couldn't change the rules tomorrow?
God, I mean, no, he can't exist and not exist. I mean, he'd be violating the very nature of who he is in his essence. I mean, he can't violate the laws of logic because that is essentially his governing property.
So why can you recognize that being the nature of God and not recognize that being the nature, period, the nature of reality? Why is your assumption that all of reality is always subject to change, as opposed to, like, I don't know where you ground that claiming?
What I'm trying to say is you can't prove laws of logic do not exist without relying upon them. It's a vicious circle that you would be trying to argue.
Yeah,
That
I'm not trying.
you need a fundamental source to govern and to have those properties
Yes,
emanate into reality.
yes, but I'm not. But this is the thing. I'm not rejecting the laws of logic. I'm saying that that source is reality itself. That is the source. But you're saying that there has to be a mind with intentional states.
Yeah,
And I'm
because
saying
again,
that,
I go back to those four properties that only God is timeless, universal, unchanging, and a mind or a governing mind.
and I would say that there's nothing about that one, why mind would matter here. Two, why reality without a mind couldn't be unchanging. Why even a reality couldn't be timeless. Why spaceless would have to be a feature? I think again, these are, for me, these are arbitrary claims you're making. I don't see. Again, I'm not trying to be
Because all
uncharitable,
I hear is claims that the world is not changing. I don't see any justification to believe that.
and I don't. Okay, but well, I'm saying that again, for my worldview, it's not a problem one way or another, because I don't think that the change or lack of change would be a problem for us using reasoning in a way that's useful. What I'm saying is that I don't see your claims being justified, that these are the attributes necessary for intelligibility, and that you've actually grounded these things beyond just what you feel is the case. Like I can, I mean, I think you're kind
Well,
of,
we
there's a
need the
shift of the burden of proof here.
preconditions to be able to establish intelligibility. Meaning, if we can't do that, that there is literally no point of having this conversation.
Yeah, and I'm saying that we
Which
can
is
do
like,
that, right? And I'm saying that the reason why we can is because reality is the way that it is, and as such, there are certain patterns that emerge that haven't changed. Now, they could change tomorrow. There's no reason to think they will. They haven't changed so far, right? So what we have is a tool that continues and has always worked, and that could be a feature of reality. That there is some aspect of reality that does not change, and as such, we use the laws of logic as descriptions of that reality that is unchanging and just is what it is, right? Why would I need to presuppose that this
well,
nature,
because that is the foundation of your worldview. It's just a guess.
so is yours? Well, no, it's not just a guess. It's not just a guess. It's something I'm actually having an experience of. It's not just a guess.
But yeah, we all have
It is you who's
experiences, but there's a
guessing.
difference between having an experience and justifying that experience.
Well, yeah, but sure, but the
So
experience
you're
I'm
just
talking
saying that it
about.
could be this or it could be that. I
Well,
mean,
no,
I'm
so
giving a
I'm
pretty,
having an experience of the patterns, right? Like that is justification. So here, uh,
which is a description, right?
yeah,
All
fine,
you're
call it that.
doing is describing the world, which is not giving justification. It's just a
So
descriptive claim.
they could arise. Well, no, the descriptions are of the explanation for the descriptions is just the justification as to why it's reasonable to uh, believe in those descriptions. So Manifest Atheist says, no, they could arise with the universe. All Brian is saying is that existence relies on certain conditions. Naturalism works with that premise. That's what I'm saying. That um, intelligibility, my capacity to understand the world and communicate, is based on the observations that the universe
So
has
what?
certain conditions.
Yeah. So what he's saying
And
though is they could arise with the universe. So what's assumed in that statement is that the universe arised, meaning laws of logic, which are tethered to or emergent properties of the universe or material or natural phenomenon, arose, and they were bound to that universe. And because they arose, that means there was a time in which laws of logic were not true. And I would say anybody with a rational mind doesn't believe that they do believe the eternal universal nature of laws of logic that are separated from emergent properties from physical phenomenon.
but I could take a Graham Oppes approach to naturalism and say that there's some necessary foundation to reality that has always been, that is unchanging, and it doesn't require us to assume that this state has a mind. Like I can agree to what you're saying as far as there's some
And that's
unchanging.
where I would say you can't separate laws of logic from the mind, meaning there has to be a governing mind. Like
But that's
laws
just the
of
point.
logic are irrevocable to the mind. They are not floating around in the ether somewhere.
I think
They're
you're
not.
confusing. I think you're confusing the state of affairs with the description of the state of affairs, and believing that this description itself exists as some Platonic form that gave rise to the state of affairs. I'm saying that these laws are
Exactly what you're
descriptions of
doing.
what
That's
is the
exactly what
case.
you're doing, right?
No, at all. I'm doing the opposite. I'm saying that there is not a distinction. I'm saying that there's not an immaterial world. I'm saying that the laws of logic are descriptions of what already is the case. Like that reality is reality.
Yeah.
And we
Again, I
apply
guess this
these
is where
theories.
our conversation kind of
Sure.
we'll always take a left turn into the ditch. Is where we disagree, I think, of the fundamental nature, which we'll probably never get to a point of reconciliation, is that I would prescribe to the immaterial nature of reality, and where you don't. And
Yeah.
I give my justification for the immaterial, and you give your justification for how that's tethered to the material. I think that's just, we're at the point in the road where we're just like trying to tug each other.
Sure. No, I think that's fair. I think that just like I think from your perspective, you feel that I can't justify intelligibility from a materialist perspective. I think that you can't justify it from your perspective. Um, I think there's no problem with justifying it as an atheist, as a materialist, if I just say that there are certain necessary aspects to reality that doesn't need a mind in order to do that. But look, I appreciate you coming on and having the conversation. I think that it's. I hope that this was beneficial to the people, at least in the audience, listening to this conversation. And I appreciate your time. Oh, you still there? I think you're cutting out again. I can't hear you now. Can you guys still hear me in the audience? Oh, can you guys still hear me? I hope I'm not freezing here. If you guys can hear me, just please let me know. Okay, perfect. Yeah, okay, then it must be on his end. Yeah, so I agree. Like, obviously, the description of the laws of logic didn't exist until minds emerge. That's irrelevant to do, something to do with whether or not reality still had a inherent pattern to it. Brian, are you still there? Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on his end. Paul says logic has nothing to do with Christianity, though. Even if it was prescriptive and required a mind, there's nothing in Brian's argument to suggest it has to be the Christian's God's mind. Okay, good. Yeah, I still don't see how that's grounded in any concrete way. Like, intelligibility can just be an expression of our reality, like us coming, experiencing that reality, noticing the patterns, and being able to reason through that.
You there?
So yeah, I can hear now.
Hey, sorry, man. Well, let's just try to continue this another time, man.
Sure,
I'll get
sure.
better internet.
No worries.
Apologies for that,
No,
but
you're good.
I think we had a
I
productive
appreciate you coming
conversation.
on.
Maybe we can get into some other things at another time, like
Sure,
morality and some of
absolutely.
those other questions to the worldview.
Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, have a good one. So just before I end this, it's been going on for an hour, past an hour already. I'd like to hear some feedback. Like, do you guys feel like Brian or I were able to provide justification for either perspective? I mean, I know that I have some theists in the audience as well. And if anybody's watching this later on, if you can leave it in the comments as to what you feel made the most sense, or if you guys feel like my perspective was expressed clearly, because I'm always trying to get better at how I say things. And yeah, let me know what you guys think about it. But aside from that, just as far as shows coming up, I'm going to be doing an interview with a former Christian on Sunday. Thank you, Alec. I appreciate it. A former Christian on Sunday, I believe it is. And then I'm going to be hosting a debate on evolution on Tuesday. I don't hear how the mind can govern logic if it's beholden to the metaphysically. Yeah, that's the other thing I don't understand, right? Like, if he's saying that logic is inherent within the nature, why can't he understand that that can apply to a naturalist perspective? Who says that there has to be that nature has to always be changing? I can posit an aspect of nature which metaphysically is necessary and does not change. Why is that? Why does that require a mind? I don't feel like any of his claims were justified. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. I'm gonna call it a night here, I think. Unless you guys have any questions or last comments you want to make before I go. If concepts existed outside our minds, we would all think of the very same thing when we say concept. If I say think of an equilateral triangle, none of us will think the exact same thing. Thank you for your time and knowledge. That was a good stream. Good chat on your part. Well, thank you everybody for your feedback. I appreciate the conversation, and I appreciate all of your support. And hopefully we'll be able to come out with more content soon. So hope everybody stays safe, and I will see you guys next time.